just heard in that intro is the Tim V3 as the main overdrive, and my settings here are going to be preset number 1. These are the settings, so the time at noon, feedback all the way off, delay in the middle, mod in the middle, and this guy is somewhere between 10 and 11. This example is using the Hall reverb and the FTE delay. What I've done is set these parameters, saved it to the first bank, and I'm also using the syntax to navigate between all the different presets that I created. Instead of coming over here and just pressing on a small button, which is not always convenient, this is a very cool pedal to use with this. Now, I'm not going to be using the syntax for any other examples except this. I've watched all the videos that are currently on YouTube, and there are so many people that have done a great job of explaining what all the knobs do and how to get the best out of it. What I wanted to do is do something different and show you different ways to use this in mono, in stereo, and through the effects loop. I'm going to be trying to recreate some cool tones from the 1980s. I'm going to go for the more ambient, almost praise and worship kind of thing. I'm also going to dial in different tones. So I have 8 different presets. You can use the timestamps below and navigate to any point of this video. So we're not going to focus in too much on the controls, but rather the type of tones you can get out of it. The signal chain is pretty simple. I recorded everything with the wiretap, so that way I can just press on play, set everything, and record it that way. The signal chain is the polytune, the wiretap. I'm not using the fuzz all that much except for the tail end of the intro whenever it punches before it gets to the chorus. So I'm not going to be using this pedal. I'm using the compressor a lot. I have 2 different settings. Going to the Tim, and the Tim I'm not changing the parameters all that much. I may increase the gain just a bit for a few example and then tweak the filters here. The harmonist is going to be used more as a chorus. So what I'm doing here is I have one side slightly detuned and the other is remaining the same. This is a good technique that Eddie Van Halen used a lot in the 1990s, except he was using the Eventide stuff. I'm just using the Boss Harmonist HR2. And then obviously the red cable is going to the Vox AC15. The black cable is going to the Deluxe Reverb. I'm using the 2 notes, so I have the Torpedo Captor 16 and the Captor X over here, and I'm going to be using the Celestion Speaker Mix Pro for the IRs, and I'm using basically the same speakers that are in these amplifiers. So now let's go to the next example, and like I said, use those timestamps. That way you can jump to any section of this video. So here are the parameters here that I've dialed in for preset number 2. The intention was to go for more of a slapback 1950s type of tone. I'm just using the side of the Vox AC15, so I'm running this in mono, not using the Deluxe Reverb. Here I'm using the Room and the, I guess SPC would be the Space Echo. And I'm just getting that slapback and a bit of room, and I find that this in mono sounds incredible. I'm just using the compressor here, which overdrives the input stage of the Vox AC15 just ever so slightly, and I'm not using anything else for this particular example. So for preset number 3, I have the time just a little bit past 2. Same for the feedback. Delay is at 11. The mod is at 3. And this guy, the reverb, is at 11. I'm using the hall reverb with the tape echo. The intention here was to create something that's very spacey, almost like praise and worship kind of thing. It's not really the kind of music I'm into, but that's what I was aiming to replicate. I have the harmonist instantiated, which creates that chorusy effect. I've lowered the gain quite a lot on this example and just raised the volume, and the bass has been bumped up just a tiny bit, and I'm adding some compression, but not too much compression, so that way it's boosting the tim. And that's really the basics of the sound. With these two amplifiers, it's super lush, and I love the stereo effect. It's very cool, and I can tell you, in person, it sounds even wider than what you're going to hear on YouTube, but YouTube is still getting a very good impression of what the stereo effect is. But if ever you do get this and you have two amplifiers, if you're able to get something similar to these pedals, you're going to really enjoy that sound. Now for preset number 4, I was going for that 1980s type of chorus, compression, super clean type of tone. In this example, I'm using the song from Def Leppard, Hysteria, and I'm using the compression here quite heavily, going into the harmonist for that type of chorus effect. I'm using the plate reverb and the FTE delay, obviously in the stereo configuration. The time is just a little bit past noon, feedback all the way down, decay at around 11, mod just a bit past noon, and reverb at around 11. So yeah, this is a very fun tone, especially if you're going to be playing that type of 1980s super pristine clean. Sounds great with these two amplifiers. So preset number 5 is as simple as it gets. I'm not using any of the other pedals except the Catacomb. So you can see the settings here. Time is at around 11. Feedback and delay at around 2. The mod is at around 12. And the reverb 1. I'm using the shimmer for the reverb and the space for the delay. The way I have it set is that the space is way shorter and it sounds almost like a short reverb, and I'm using the shimmer as a longer reverb. So I'm stacking two different times in terms of reverb, if you will. And I got this idea from listening to a lot of Jeff Buckley. There's a live version where he does a medley of Leonard Cohen and the Smiths, and I covered the Smiths song in this example. And I find that it gets you a really lush but very usable reverb, even though it's kind of loud in the mix. So that is the example for preset number 5. So preset number 6, I was aiming to replicate the guitar tone from the band The Outfield. They had an album back in the 1980s or early 90s called The Voices of Babylon, and I really like the guitar tones on that particular album. So what I did here is use compression through the harmonist, and then over here I have the time at noon, the feedback at 9 o'clock, delay at 3, and these two at noon. I'm using the shimmer for the reverb and the Bucket Brigade delay for the delay. And it's a pretty simple setup, but it sounds very cool if you're aiming to replicate those types of tones. Preset number 7 is pretty simple. I'm using the Tim for the overdrive, and I'm using the Catacomb in mono. This is the Hall reverb with the Bucket Brigade delay. What I have here is a pretty straightforward kind of tone. What I was aiming for is just have that kind of slight delay, slight reverb, just to put some support behind every note that you play, but not be super obvious and in the mix. So it's more of something just to sustain whatever you're playing. So I would use this in most cases if I was playing with a band and we were playing blues or more mellow stuff. You get that reverb to sustain your notes and the delay to add some ambience, and that was the point of this setting. Now I'm going to be recreating another one that's going to have the same purpose, but this time it's going to be in stereo. Now we're going to be listening to the reverbs in the Catacombs. I'm using a Hot Rod Deluxe, sending the signal out to the effects loop. So the wiretap is going to channel 2, and then I have the effects loop connected with the Catacombs. If you turn down the delay, as I did over here, you're not hearing the delay, you're just hearing the reverb. You hold the bypass, and then you can switch between the 5 different types of reverb found on the Catacombs. So we're going to listen to those, and then in the next example, we're going to be listening to the 6 different delays, and that should give you a really good impression of what the Catacombs sound like. So the previous example was a combination of both delay and reverb, and now we're isolating each, and we're going to listen to every single one of them. So we're going to start with the reverb. going to do the same thing with the delay. I got the reverb turned down all the way.